Welcome to all platforms, to all groups, to everyone. I'm Miss Wilson, and let us all thank God for the teachings that we're about to receive. Of course, this is a continuation of the book of Acts. So let's get into it right away. Luke says the reason why I'm writing this book, the book of Acts, is to show you that the kingdom that he brought to earth is active now, even in his physical absence. Very important. The book of Acts, therefore, is supposed to record the acts or the actions of the kingdom of God in earth. Turn to Acts 28. Let's close the book. We went through this whole book. I hope you enjoyed it. I trust you would take the recordings and go through these sessions with us again. It's a powerful book. We're going to talk about the kingdom message of Paul. You see, if this book doesn't end with the kingdom message, then Luke fails. Because that's the way the book opens, and that was the message that Jesus thought, and that was his instructions, and that was his emphasis, and that was his assignment. Kingdom, kingdom, kingdom. So if the book doesn't end with kingdom, the book failed. We're going to be focusing on understanding Paul's message. Now, listen to me carefully, please. You Bible students, listen to me carefully. Most Christians love Paul more than Jesus. I mean, they will never say it. We love to read Corinthians, Ephesians, Galatians, Thessalonians, Timothy, Titus, Romans. What a lovely book. We don't spend much time in Matthew. Once you read them once, you don't want to read them anymore, huh? Oh, I know what's there, you say. How about Luke? How about John? Most of us quote Paul more than Jesus. My God shall supply all our needs. He will begin a new work in you. He will bring it to completion. It is more blessed to give than to receive. That's what Paul said, not Jesus. Paul was quoting Jesus, but he quoted it differently. And we quote Paul rather than what Jesus said. I'm getting to a point here. Now, let me warn you about Paul. Now, Paul is a very and probably the most important apostolic authority in church doctrine. More important than Peter or James or John. These are the three pastors in Jerusalem. Peter, James, and John was the three top guy that Jesus left in charge. And Peter, of course, was a senior pastor, but they didn't talk much about doctrine. Peter didn't talk much about, like correcting problems and dealing with issues. When you read Paul, you must be careful. I'm trying to choose my word carefully because I'm dealing with tender minds. Paul's writings are not necessarily writings to communicate the gospel. When you read Paul's writings, and Paul's writing include 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Colossians, Ephesians, Philippians, Timothy, Titus, Thessalonians, Philemon. These writings are not intended to teach you about the Gospels. Very important. These writings, if you study Paul's writings, 80% or more of them were written to address problems that the people who are already in the kingdom were having. So Paul's writings are really concerned with living in the kingdom rather than the kingdom itself. Hope you're understanding what I'm saying? So when you read Paul's writings, don't look primarily for the gospel. If you want to understand Jesus, and if you want to understand his message, you must focus on Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. If you don't, you will end up being doctrine heavy and kingdom shallow. Are we clear? You see, we spend more time reading Paul's doctrinal letters than we did reading the mind of Jesus from his own words. And we became what they call name and theology, a Pauline apostle. What's a Pauline apostle? A Pauline convert, someone who thinks more like Paul than Jesus. And most believers in the evangelical churches and in the traditional churches are converts of Paul rather than Jesus. And you're sitting next to one right now. Now, it's important to correct this, because when you read Paul's writings, you gotta approach them from the point of view that Paul is not intending to focus on the gospel. So the book of 1 Corinthians, which is the first book Paul wrote, Paul was dealing with what? Problem in the church of Corinth. Corinth was a town east side of the church. And in that church, they have a lot of problems. And if you read the book of Corinth, Paul talking a lot about sex and about moralities and homosexuality and about incest and long hair and short hair. And he did all these things. Why? Because these people came out of a situation where they were mostly prostitutes. Corinth was the capital of the Roman worship of the god Eros. That's where we get our word erotic from. That's where we get our word erotica from. That's where we get our word fleshly sex. That was a god in Corinth. And Paul went there, and that city was filled with homosexual and lesbians and prostitutes, because it had a capital temple of the worship of the sex goddess. Do you understand that? That's why everyone worshipped in the act of sex. It was actually a cult where sex is the way you worshipped. So when you read the first book of Corinthians, Paul was dealing with people who got converted.